you all. My name is João Menezes. I'm the Secretary General of BCSD Portugal, and I'm pleased to be your host for the next hour and a half. As you know, this webinar is focused on culture as a response to the most pressing challenges that Europe and the world are facing as we enter this new critical decade with so many environmental, social, and public health challenges. I'd like to cover in this intro just a couple of very brief topics. I'll just make in this intro, I'll just cover the challenges of Europe for the current decade very quickly, of course. And then the new European Bauhaus and the role of culture and arts for sustainable development. And then I'll introduce the stream magicians in the house this afternoon. So with no further ado, I mean, as you understand, for the benefit of the two of our guests, this session will run in English, but of course, feel free to ask your questions, write them down. And for that, please use the chat feature on the bottom of your screens. Please, we welcome you to write your questions, of course, or remarks in Portuguese. And with no further ado, so I just would like to set the scene by saying that, of course, the European Union is facing, I would say, two main challenges on the environmental side, which is carbon neutrality and biodiversity. We need a drop of 55% on carbon emissions until 2030, and we need to restore biodiversity and become nature positive, of course, until 2032. But on the social side, we must tackle poverty and social inequalities also. Estou aqui a perder o comando, Joana, perdi o comando. Okay. We must tackle poverty and inequalities. In a very quick movie.
The 17 Sustainable Development Goals set by the UN are described as the blueprint for a more sustainable future for all. They address the global challenges we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. The EU wants to deliver on this agenda by 2030 and, for the first time, will integrate the objectives of the SDGs in the European semester. This is the annual process of monitoring member states' finances and economic policies. So far, progress is not the same in all member states. The countries closest to achieving the SDGs are Denmark, Sweden, Finland, France, Austria, Germany, and the Netherlands, but none are yet on track to achieve them all by 2030. At the bottom of the list are Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, and Cyprus, all far below the EU average.
Okay, so I mean, we have this roadmap, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations Agenda to 2030. In one single sentence, I would say that we need to make sure that we are able to have a fast shift towards a sustainable development goal, to a sustainable development model in Europe during this decade. And why? Because, as you know, there's no planet B. And even though the images that NASA released from Mars are amazing, Mars is not, of course, yet an option B. And so how is Europe answering the challenges that we're facing? On one hand, an European Green Deal was launched last year, and it involves 1.8 trillion investment until 2030 investment effort. That's more or less 8% of the Portuguese GDP. Then more recently, a recovery pack was launched, the Next Generation EU, to face the crisis due to the pandemics. And that's an envelope of 750 billion euros that should be in place, invested until 2025, 26. And it's the sum of these two envelopes, these two financing streams, funding streams, to face the challenges I've just mentioned, the environmental challenges and the social challenges, The sum of these two streams are more or less equivalent to 10 times the Portuguese GDP, but also more recently, amongst plans for European hydrogen valleys and further digitalization, von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, has, announced the launch of this new European Bauhaus. And the Bauhaus movement, as you know, was born out of the First World War and the flu epidemic that followed this First World War. It opened in Weimar as a school in Germany 100 years ago in 1919, with this commitment to bring together the arts and crafts to design new ways of living for a future better world. Now, 100 years after, faced with two similarly daunting crises, COVID-19 and the climate emergency, the European Commission has announced the launch of this new European Bauhaus as a way to design future ways of living, situated at the crossroads between art, culture, social inclusion, science and technology, a collective effort to imagine and build a future that is sustainable, inclusive and beautiful for our minds and our souls. Instead of form follows function, the new Bauhaus asks us to consider form follows planet, as its aspiration is to create a design movement integrating 3 dimensions: sustainability, including circularity, circular economy, quality of experience, including aesthetics, and inclusion, including affordability. So 100 years after its origins, von der Leyen is seeking to engage us all, from designers to architects to digital experts and entrepreneurs, in a process of social transformation, much like that took place under the guise of Walter Gropius and Mies van der Rohe and many more. The first tweet that was the quick start of this initiative was released on the 18th of January by the European Commission, saying, "We call on designers, architects, engineers, scientists, students, entrepreneurs, and creative minds to reimagine sustainable living in Europe and beyond." But I think there's much more at stake than just new shapes for tangible assets like objects or infrastructures or buildings. It's mostly, or it's above all, about reviving and reimagining Europe through culture. The European Culture Foundation, most of you or some of you might know, and Culture Action Europe published a manifesto recently called A Cultural Deal for Europe that calls for at least 2% of the recovery funds to be delivered to cultural and creative enterprises in order to mainstream culture across all policy fields to fully realize its potential. Specifically, they're demanding in this manifesto the full inclusion of culture in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the European Green Deal. Many of its components, such as buildings renovation, circular economy, or the farm to fork and biodiversity strategies, are inseparable from cultural values and resources. Thus, culture and cultural heritage is crucial in achieving a new paradigm for designing the future of Europe. To summarize, there's this key role for culture in Europe and the future of the world. Arts and culture are one of the Europe's core industry, as well as its soft power and identity. Culture is what brings us together, as it is at the basis of the European project and a catalyst for the future of Europe. Of course, also, like biodiversity, cultural diversity is one of the most important legacies we've inherited from the past and should be preserved for the future. And culture is the heart and soul of any education system, a very powerful way to shape behaviors and attitudes towards citizenship and collective will. So with no further ado, let me just introduce you. I'm very honored and pleased again to have these 3 magicians in the house today, the keynote speakers. On one hand, we have Dharmendra Kanani. Dharmendra is, I could say, I think, an old friend of mine. He's currently Director of Strategy at Friends of Europe. Friends of Europe is a think tank based in Brussels, which mission is to revitalize the European project and build a more inclusive, sustainable, and forward-thinking Europe. One of the, I would say, most well-known and remarkable projects led by Friends of Europe is the European Young Leaders Program that has brought together the brightest minds and outside of the box leaders to put their innovative thinking to work in building a more forward-thinking Europe that is a global champion for a better world. The European Young Leaders represent a new generation of leaders from a variety of backgrounds, including politics, business, civil society, art, science, and media. I think currently there's over 200 European young leaders. And then we have, of course, also Montserrat Marin Ferrer. She's a representative of the European Commission's new European Bauhaus. The new European Bauhaus, I've already addressed it, I've scratched the surface, but anyway, is an initiative that connects the European Green Deal to our living spaces. It calls on all Europeans to imagine and build together a sustainable and inclusive future that is beautiful for the eyes, minds, and souls. It's a bridge between the worlds of science and technology on one hand, and on the other hand, the world of art and culture. And last but not the least, we have also Tiago Sigurrelho, co-founder and president of Gerador. He'll let you know about it. Gerador is a Portuguese independent platform of journalism, culture, and education. Recently, Gerador launched this project called Sobressalto as a way to leverage and enhance the power of culture in the fight against the current most pressing environmental challenges. So we have this kind of smooth lineup that we've arranged previously. Each one of our guest speakers will be addressing 3 questions, and afterwards, I'm glad to have a conversation between the 4 of us and you, the audience. So please, again, feel free to send us over your questions or remarks. We'll read them and we'll somehow have them into consideration in the Q&A or in the conversation that will follow their keynote speeches. So with no further ado, please, Dharmendra, the floor is yours. And the first question is, how do you see the current state of Europe? In your opinion, what are the main challenges for the decade ahead? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joao. Thank you very much for having me and Friends of Europe on this panel. It's a real pleasure to be part of this timely discussion. And I think it's timely, especially for the context you've set it in, and really looking forward to hearing about the Bauhaus initiative, which I think I have to say is a hugely insightful, timely approach, which none of us would have imagined that the Commission of old would have set in pace and flow, but more of that later. In terms of the question you've asked me to address, it's in 2 parts, the state of Europe and what we think are the main challenges ahead. I think in order to answer the first part of the question, I'd like to start by thinking about how nation states or member states and the European Union are a set of systems that interact in many ways and in various ways. And I suppose in the past 12 months, these systems have been given the most incredible shock, unplanned, not even thought of broadly in terms of what could happen when something that comes in left field, and with all the leadership training, all the preparedness training these governments and the European Commission might have been engaged in, no one for a moment, even in the first 3 months of this crisis, believed that we were going to experience what we have. And what we've seen is actually a really depressing reflection of how resilient, shock absorbent, and prepared our national and European-wide systems are. We know what's happened in the past 12 to 14 months. There's no need to rehearse that. But I think it's interesting that what this crisis, which is not only the pandemic, it's also economic, and it's also on the wings of 2 other crises, which I'll refer to in a moment, which are digital and climate. So this particular crisis, in all its shape and forms, has tested the values underpinning the European project. It's tested the sense of camaraderie, the sense of political alliance to the EU value base and its project and its mission. And we've seen it's a real test of what can happen between the center and the margins of Europe when it doesn't have the core sorted, and when it doesn't have the kind of conversations it's needed to have for at least the past 60 years. But suddenly, as a result of this crisis, those conversations have had to be had. We know what happened at the early part of this crisis, and the debacle of the treatment of Italy in the early days, and then other countries, the poorer countries in Europe. And then finally, we had a movement and a shift along. And what this crisis has demonstrated in a way is to really embolden and make more highly visible the inherent tensions in the project. And I think it's been interesting that we've seen that a brand new college, a college of commissioners, a commission led by a woman, and with more women than ever in the driving seat, has attempted to be much more consensus building and try to achieve a feat which many would never have imagined they would pull off. And that is the numbers you were talking about, Joao, about the recovery package. And I think that one of the significant, I suppose, milestones and successes of this new commission has been to pull off in effect, a debt project playing on the markets that will tie us to debt for the next 7 to 10 years, if not longer, but actually pulled it off politically to say, this is a kind of a win or lose game. And if we are not going to really take a deep breath and actually really see and take account of what we're witnessing in terms of what's happening, the carnage that's happening across Europe, then the game's a bogey. And I think it's been good that we've had this, let's say, budgetary mechanism in place. I think the issues in terms of the other aspects of the state we're in are that, just like human nature, we tend to put things off until they're absolutely, in a state of disrepair. Whether that might be to do with our health, whether we deal with climate, whether we deal with problems in life and communities per se. And in the initial stages, by actually putting off the inevitable, we've lost a lot. And I think one of the lessons, or the travesties of where we find ourselves right now, is that the inability of the EU and member states to come together on a message of protection and prevention in a consistent fashion has meant domestic states have confused, compromised, and lost the trust of communities in terms of what's safe and what's not. And we have what we have across Europe. The other element, which, before I move on to what I think the challenges are going to be in the next decade, is that we are witnessing the largest public debt in history. People have referred to this crisis as being something about, the 1930s, the crisis we have. That, it does not compare to where we are now. We have never, none of our leaders, none of our political leaders, none of our economists, none of our nation states and systems have ever had experience of dealing with something on this scale and level and depth. And we have to be real about that. Sometimes we have to be forgiving about it, but we actually have to make sure that we understand what that means. The level of debt that this $1 trillion euro package means is that we are relying on the ways in which the markets will work in the future, which is a huge bet, which we know markets are highly emotional. We are banking on member states and to be able to really make sense of the very limited muscle they have in terms of tax raising. And you've got member states, there isn't one in the EU that hasn't borrowed much more than it ever has done in its history against its tax revenues. So you're in a situation where, Europe PLC and member states PLC are broke, at least into the next 2 to 3 years, 5 years, if not longer. And so that will have an impact directly into this conversation about whether it's to do with culture, economy, sustainability, and other elements of community life. Because actually, where you have a large state, a national government, their ability to fund will be hugely, hugely restrained. And that my experience in the UK in particular is that where you're tight for money, the first things that go are the soft end. That's culture and arts and other kind of supplementary, what I regard as supplementary features of public service, let alone the impact on just services across Europe. So that's a bleak picture. But as we look ahead, and I mentioned this about the other two crises in the wings, last year was hottest on record. We know that. And look at the temperatures right now, and look at the crazy weather we're experiencing all across the world, especially also in Europe. And what we don't have preparedness for is what will happen when we will have more experiences with shorter distances between them of really extreme weather conditions. And we will witness that in the next 24 to 36 months. Be no doubt about that. We will be, and that sounds depressing, I know, but that's the reality of the situation. So there's something about how do we prepare ourselves to other shocks that are in the making. And I think what we've experienced now is that we should have enough experience amongst at least civil servants and leaders to know what to do around this. The other is digital. The biggest winners in Europe and globe, and most of them are tech companies that are owned in the US, have been the share prices of tech companies. We have suddenly all transformed our lives online due to lockdown and other matters. And so therefore, whether we are shopping, learning, working, relating, it's all digital. And that is going to have a huge impact on our lives, our communities, our sense of well-being, and our mental health. And so I think one of the things that we need to look ahead for is that how do we make sure that in this context, as we look ahead, the challenges that we have ahead of us is to make sure, and that's why I'm interested in the Bauhaus initiative, that you introduce an element of innovation and creativity into the process. You take a whole community, whole economy approach, because you're looking at every aspect of society to really think and come together to devise solutions and ideas about how we move forward. But in that, what needs to happen is that we're going to have to, the commission is going to have a real tight hold on policy and how it deals with decision making. I've often described it as it needs to take a war room mentality to developing its decisions and how it moves forward. Absolutely. And I mean a war room mentality. It means that, Ursula von der Leyen actually meets on a regular basis and actually takes straightforward facts and information and advice to understand what's going on in Europe. She needs a dashboard that tells her what's happening so that you can react in an agile fashion and take things forward in a meaningful way. I think the issues around digital are vast. We've seen a slew of policies introduced in the past 3 months to do with digital service tax, digital service market, etc., and so forth, all about privacy and the competition on the tech side. But let's not forget that in terms of, and I'll end on these points, that the challenge in the next 10 years is that we need to make sure that the spending that we have available to us is geared in a way to do one of the things that we've not been able to do in the past, is maintain a level of decency amongst communities, whilst re-engineering the system to be more digital and green. And that is a phenomenal challenge for anyone, let alone a nation state or a European project. But that's what the stakes are. And I was in an interview recently with the McKinsey Global Institute chairman. And, one of the things he was saying is that we have 24 months. 24 months in order to do the right thing. And actually what he said, and I totally agree with, this is what Friends of Europe is also commenting on, is that all the theories that we have around fiscal policy, monetary policy are out the window, because of what I described in terms of public debt and the situation we find ourselves in. We cannot operate by the past rules of the game. We need to create new ones. And part of that means we take a deep breath on the public debt and spend wisely in the next 24 months. Do not take the foot off the lever, if you like. Spend so that we don't have the double, triple dip that we had following the financial crisis. And so we're able to spend wisely so that we keep that sense of those who have suffered the most. Don't forget, this crisis has highlighted the failures of our system already, but actually pronounced them more, i.e. the poorest have got poorer, the most unhealthy have become unhealthier, and those who are economically viable and not viable have become more so and less so. And so I think we need to think in the round about how you spend to make sure there's a minimum fabric of support across societies. But whilst you take people with you, and this is going to be the challenge between the east of Europe, the south of Europe, the west of Europe, and the north, about the plans that member states are putting into place right now. Portugal, Spain, others are putting those plans together to say they will rewire their systems to be sustainable, but to be green and digital friendly and digitally enabled. And that's a task that we've never done before. But actually, if you think about it, you think that if you've been through one of the worst crises in your lives, personally, community, nationally, internationally, I hope the climate is the right one to make sure we move this in the right direction, because without it, we really are done for. The biggest challenge, I think, in the next 10 years, and this is a simple one, it's about psychology, human nature, and leadership. If our leaders are going to play politics in the way it's always been played, do games in the way they've always done, and actually run their systems in the way they've always done, we're not going to get through this crisis. We need a different approach. And I hope that the Bauhaus Initiative and what the other things that they've been doing in this commission, and I'll go back to that point, with more women in the driving seat, I hope we can actually create a different culture of operation delivery and mindset, but keeping a real tight handle on the ringer to make sure things happen. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you so much for this first round. You know, Dharmendra is really a professional on stage. I mean, because he touched upon 4 or 5 critical issues that couldn't have a better match with what I was about to ask to Montserrat. So just to summarize very briefly, one of the challenges he has just put on the table is that we must regain or recover the trust of people on the systems, the trust of people and communities. And all of these 4 topics are, of course, related with the new European Bauhaus. On one hand, or firstly, and first of all, I would say the new European Bauhaus seems a very human-centered initiative. Then he warned us for the threat of public debts, or the challenge of the amount of public debt. One of the I would say one of the characteristics about this new European Bauhaus is that there's no financial envelope associated. That might be a bottleneck, of course, a pitfall, but anyway, so it won't increase the debt, it seems. And then, of course, Dharmendra also warned us about the digitalization, as the new European Bauhaus is human-centered, it's tangible, it's all about immersive experience. It's the opposite to the digital world. It's a way to humanize the digital world, I would say, leveraging the digital, but human-centered, has a way, not has an end. And last but not the least, he warned us or told us about the climate emergency, and that's the inner center to tackle those challenges for the decade of the European Bauhaus. Form follows planet, or function follows planet. And last but not the least, this idea of a new mindset, and yes, a new approach. Yes, indeed, the new European Bauhaus seems a new approach, but nothing like hearing it from Montserrat. Montserrat, thank you so much for being part of these two. How do you see, I mean, how will the new European Bauhaus be able to translate the European Green Deal? How will the new European Bauhaus translate the European Green Deal into something which is tangible, lively, human-centered, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you to you, Joao, and thank you also to Dharmendra for the introduction. I would like to share the slides, but I cannot because you are sharing still. So I have only, okay, perfect, thank you. So I will put my slides there. Okay, here you are. Do you see this? Okay. So then, good afternoon, everyone. Let's start from from this. And I was really very happy when I learned about your interest in the new European Bauhaus. It's for me a great pleasure to be here with you in this event, even if I know that we will all have loved and prefer to have a physical event. But as we were already mentioning, this pandemic has changed the way we live and work, and it changes also our perspectives and many other things. So then, however, let's take the positive side. And we know that every crisis brings opportunities. And the pandemic is an opportunity, indeed, to rethink how we want to live together and how we want to deal with the nature. Tackling climate change requires certainly us to rethink the way we live. And this is why the European Union has made the European Green Deal a key priority for us. And the new European Bauhaus initiative is intended to be a bridge in this process. It is a bridge between the wall of science and technology and the wall of art and culture, as was already mentioned by Joao, but it's also a bridge between citizens and institutions, as was now mentioned as well, that this is very much needed. And it is a bridge between existing needs and existing solutions. So then let's try to see all together how this could work. As you may know, the new European Bauhaus was announced by the President of the European Commission in her State of the Union speech last September. What is the idea and the ambition behind the new European Bauhaus? How can we really turn this huge climate change challenge into a positive experience for everybody? How can the necessary become beautiful too? This is what she said. What can make us benefit from this needed transformation? This initiative should not provide only visions, but also produce tangible products, able to demonstrate the added value of this new way of working. We believe that the starting point to do this is to connect people beyond their usual silos, to connect different realities, because together we are stronger. The COVID crisis has highlighted, as already mentioned, our vulnerabilities, and has shown also how the different sectors are
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Montserrat. I think there's a slight delay between your slides and your speech. There's a gap between both. Not sure if...
I'm still in the slide shaping a movement. Eh?
Oh, yes, you are still in
No,
that.
because I have only 3 slides.
Oh, okay.
So it will be very, very
you.
short. Okay. Now, I was saying that the COVID crisis has highlighted the vulnerabilities, but also has shown the strongly interlinked sectors. And this complexity can only be addressed with a multidisciplinary approach, bridging disciplines and capacities, teaming up against a common enemy. The new European Bauhaus is about how we want to live together in the future while respecting our planet and protecting our environment. So this is protecting our future. It is about empowering those who are working on solutions for the climate crisis and linking them to those having challenges to be addressed. And it is about rethinking or thinking out of the box while capitalizing on the collective knowledge. You say that this is quite particular initiative because it was launched without any envelope. And I think that this is the first strong message that the Commission wanted to put on the table, and is that we have all what is needed already available. It's a matter of combining and teaming up. This was the first strong message. As you can see, this is a very ambitious initiative, and we all know that we need you all together on board to make it happen. So in a more concrete way, the idea of the European Bauhaus is to focus on the places where we live and on the way we live in there. It goes beyond buildings. It is about how we experience the places, private and public spaces, where we live, work, and move around. The objective is to address the most common challenges detected at the local level by integrating the 3 key dimensions: sustainability, including the circular economy, the social inclusion with particular attention to accessibility and affordability aspects, and the quality of experience, including aesthetics, but going beyond that and projecting safer and healthier places. So we need to think in the beautiful, in the sense that is beautiful because it will make you feel better. Where you integrate those 3 key dimensions, you are in the new European Bauhaus mood. And what is the tangible transformation we should aim at? We think that we will summarize this in 3 big blocks, starting from one that was already mentioned, which is a new mindset. This is a condition sine qua non, I will say. We have to understand that we need each other and that everyone has something to learn and something to teach. That complete and beautiful solutions will come only if we work together, putting the common well-being of our citizens at the center of the priorities. And the ultimate scope is to have a transformation happening on the ground, to change the built environment. But to do it well, we have to pay a particular attention to fostering innovation into market, to accelerate and upscaling the solutions so that we will be accessible to all of us. And this should be also accompanied by the reskilling of the workers. So it's really a broad scope. And I never say that this is going to be easy, but we are convinced that this is doable if we all collaborate. So how are we going to develop this project? With this initiative, indeed, we have chosen a different approach from the traditional commission's consultation. We are convinced that bouncing back better from the pandemic while achieving the needed sustainable and inclusive transformation requires more than courageous and wise public policies. This requires a profound change of perspective. Such an ambition cannot be achieved without a new approach in the design of the initiative and in the support framework. For a new European Bauhaus, the Commission has not started with a detailed proposal on which to launch a consultation. No, this time we have applied the philosophy of the co-design for the development of the initiative, for shaping it all together. The Commission has gone into the listening mode to define the concept with all the interested parties. So this project relies really on our capacity to engage with citizens, experts from any discipline, with all those who want to contribute. We want to co-create the concept together. And in the coming months, we want to explore together what exactly the main focus of the new European Bauhaus should be. To do that, we would like to know from you over the few weeks three main things. The first one is what kind of contemporary examples are already out there that reflect the three core principles of the new European Bauhaus. So what is already there that can be a good example? What are actions that could collectively be taken and how? Which are the solutions or ideas that are already available that should be better exploited? And furthermore, we would like to know from you, which are the biggest challenges of the society that the new European Bauhaus should focus on first? And this is also where we count on you. We count on the creative minds of architects, designers, artists. We count also on the experienced minds of the practitioners and policymakers, with the wise and essential insight of the social sector and the civil society, with the practical and innovative approach that the scientific community will bring. We need you all for this co-design phase. We would like to facilitate this exchange of knowledge, ideas, and needs between these stakeholders, to empower communities to create a true interdisciplinary project. This project is very ambitious, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we know that there are already a lot of amazing spaces and buildings and ideas for inclusive and sustainable ways of living. Let's go to discover them, and let's go to take a stock and to move forward. Since we all agree that collectively we are able to identify common challenges linked to the climate change, that our collective knowledge is a key asset, and that collectively we have an incredible number of solutions already available, who could say that collectively we will not be able to provide a solution or to improve the way we live and to protect our future? I think I will stop here for the time being, because I know that we will have more questions later on.
Okay, Montserrat, thank you so much for clarifying a bit further what's the new European Bauhaus, the purpose, etc., and the process. Listen, Tiago, I don't want to build any kind of walls here between the three of you, of course, but I think the three of you are thinkers and doers. But if there's any difference that I could bring to the table between the three of you, I would say that mostly the European Commission and even Friends of Europe, even though it's a not-for-profit, I would say that they're more thinkers and you would be more a doer, as you are an NGO, a not-for-profit, developing projects in the ground within the communities. And so both of you think, both of you do, of course, but I would say that you're closer. And so whenever we try to understand what could be a bottom-up approach instead of a top-down, you're the right person to talk to. I mean, and the question here is, we've listened that the economy, and of course, we've listened that the public policy and the politicians, of course, elected, should serve the people and the planet. You work with culture on your everyday life and the arts. I mean, how do you see the power of the arts and culture in order to shape a new mindset, to fasten the transition towards a sustainable development model in what regards to whatever you call it, capitalism, in what regards to public policy? How do you see it from, I mean, from the playgrounds? And thank you so much also for joining us.
Thank you, João. There's a big difference between me and the rest of the invitees, that I'm not so interesting as they are, because what I heard is very, very interesting. But thank you for the invitation. It's really important for organizations like Gerador to have a space to speak in events like this one. Thanks to my dear panel colleagues. It's nice to meet you here, and hello to everyone out there, of course. I have to share a presentation as well, so if you allow me. Okay, so let's talk about what is Gerador. And I think it's important for the people who are seeing us to know what we do. So we are a non-profit organization, as you said, dedicated to journalism, to culture, and to education. And more than speaking about our mission, let me just talk about some of our projects in these three areas. I think it's more easy to explain in that way. So in journalism, we have a magazine, a print one. This is the latest number, the 33, focus on cultural themes. And we try to talk about what's going on in the country, in Portugal, with a clear intention to the population and activities in the interior. We try to run away from the metropolis news. It's the usual stuff that the main media covers, and we try to cover other things as well. We have a website. It's a website dedicated to news as well, with 500,000 viewers per month, which it's not it's relevant for the cultural market, I guess. And we publish news, opinions, research reports, and calendar of cultural initiatives. Then we pay a lot of attention to social media. We know that younger generations get their news from these platforms, so we have to pay attention to them. It's not a thing that we devalue. And we try to create content dedicated to these platforms, not only using the classical forward of the publication in the site. We actually think about social media and how we can get in touch with the people that follow us. Then there are, in the cultural dimension, there are a lot of activities that we create and we produce, but don't worry, I will talk about just about two of them. One is this summit. It's about culture and the creative sectors. It's an annual meeting where we invite artists, cultural thinkers, head of companies, and even politicians to debate the future of this sector. The last one in June last year was totally digital, of course, but this one, it should have a part not digital. Let's see. Then another activity, a really big one, a really big event that we do, it's has about 10,000 visitors in only one day, and it's called Trampolim Gerador. Trampolim Gerador, it's in one day between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. We have like a total of 60 cultural initiatives ranging from music to theater, food, street art, performance, and so much more. And we do it in everyday spaces, in the streets, and in a parking lot, in a restaurant, on an old store, or even in an apartment, if we can persuade the owner to do that, of course. And most of the times we can persuade them. Then we have another dimension, education. And what do we do in education? We have an academy with 17 different courses and new workshops every month. Courses like creative management, executive production, cultural communication, design, photography, illustration, and so on and so forth. We do a lot of research as well. Maybe barómetro gerador key metrics, it's what you are seeing here. It's the most important one. It's a poll, so it's a study representative of the Portuguese population, where we try to understand what Portuguese people think about culture. What areas do they love the most, the consumption habits that they have, and even the perception of behavior of some brands in the cultural universe. And we do it every year. It's the only study in this kind in Portugal. So we know that decision makers in cultural fields, in business field as well, look at the results from this study. And I'm really proud to announce that Gerador is part of an international consortium that has been hired by the European Commission to evaluate the statistics of the cultural and creative sectors all over the European Union. There are a lot of data out there, and we have the mission to find a way to present that data for everyone use and to create new statistics that are missing. For instance, everything about digital arts or other online activities. They are not so explored, and we have that kind of mission to try to find them. Finally, mainly everything that I talked about until now is just spending money. It's difficult to have a magazine that reaches the break-even point, or the activities that we do, most of them are for free. So what's our business model? Okay, we basically are an agency as well, not in the formal way. We still are the same non-profit organization. We'll still have the same people and the same artists, but we work with cultural institutions, state institutions, a lot of brands and companies, and we do a different approach of the creativity using the Portuguese artists at the starting point. And that's the way that we can survive, and that's the way, the model that we have. So pardon me for this part, the part talking about Gerador, but it was important to let people know what we do. So now, after this lecture, let's finally answer your question. I just need a minute, no, don't worry. Historically, arts and culture are always in the forefront of new paths of thinking. In music, in literature, in cinema, in visual arts. For instance, advertising is very much inspired by visual arts. Typically, visual arts, mainly the contemporary ones, paved the way to disruptions, and a couple of years later, you can notice that patterns, themes, or even subjects that art explores have obvious consequences in advertising. So it's natural that the creative guys that run your brand or the designers that draw the image that you use start to apply the references they follow in the DNA of your communication, even without noticing. This is a way of changing, and this is a very important way of changing. And in another perspective, of course, there are more and more artists that express themselves through some kind of activist message. And there are a lot of guys that shows this area, the environment, as their field of work. In Portugal, we have amazing artists that do this, like Bordal II, famous for his street art compositions. And I expect that this kind of trend will only have more power in the days to come.
Okay, thank you so much, Tiago. Listen, as we're running a little bit short on time, I'll just adopt the Latin way. So I'll have to merge some questions and improvise a bit.
Okay.
And so, Ahmendra, one of the things that came up to my mind, and also Montserrat, I'm sure you know, you're aware about the Medici effect, the Franz Johansson book, which was a best-selling book in 2004. Basically, the Medici effect, the idea of the Medici effect is the idea behind, or what's behind the Renaissance. So the author studies what happened in Florence, of course, in Italy, and has the Medici family invested in so many different experts from various fields, from science, from engineering, from arts, from poetry, from philosophy, etc. And the gathering of in Florence of all those multidisciplinary and multitasking experts generated a Renaissance. I mean, Florence became a hub. And if you listen to Montserrat's speech and the goal or the vision behind the new European Bauhaus, it seems pretty much the idea of a Renaissance, but the humanized and the cultural based Renaissance. And so my question to you is, I mean, you're dealing at the Friends of Europe with many European young leaders. I just checked, there are over 320 currently, and they come for diverse industries, cultures, and disciplines. And as they intersect and as they bring ideas from one field into another, I mean, and as they assemble so many diverse teams, and I mean, how do you, in so many ways, different ways, I mean, what kind of experience could you share with us, inspiring experiences of this kind of what could be, what could be the breakthrough ahead, and how could we fasten that breakthrough? It's in a micro scale. I see the gathering of the European young leaders in Brussels once per year has this very mini micro Renaissance. That's what aims the new European Bauhaus at a larger scale, of course, the European scale, and somehow in his wildest dreams, Tiago, I'm sure. So, I mean, what kind of, tangible outcomes do you see? I mean, it's an experience that you're leading or running for the last more than 10 years, I believe. So we're no longer younger or young leaders. So, I mean, what could you share with us from that? I mean, Medici effect that you're also kind of producing.
Huge, and I'll be brief because I think, as you said, time's running out, and it's good to get an interaction going. Firstly, thank you for raising the issue about the EYLs. And one of the things for us, those of you who don't know, is that we bring together every year 40 under 40 leaders. These aren't people who are in their 20s and in the 90-year-old. These are established politicians, artists, journalists, people who've done the most amazing things in their member states or in Europe wide or globally. These are well-known individuals who give up their time 2 or 3 times a year with us. And you're quite right, it is a renaissance of leadership development, because the reason why we created in the first place was that we felt there was something missing in the leadership card.
Oh, Damendra, we just lost you. You mute yourself. Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay.
I was just explaining why we brought together the concept of the European Young Leaders was to create an alternative perspective on leadership, because we felt that Europe was very white, very male, very of a particular class and a particular experience in life. And what we brought together, and what we've brought together every year, is this hugely multisectoral, multidisciplinary band of people who are so successful in their day jobs, but give up 2 or 3 days and come together, no ego, at all, which we've ever experienced, and they attend to issues around what the problems are around Europe. We've talked about, the economy. We've talked about how do we deal with the elections that were coming up less than 2 years ago. We've talked about, how do you address climate change, biodiversity, everything you can think of. But these people don't have a background in it, but we make sure we create the infrastructure and the opportunity for them to really get into it. And what we see is that therein lies the magic, because what you find is a curated approach to this alternative form of leadership, where you also throw in your director generals or your private sector chief exec. You create a space, a safe, intellectual, challenging, critical friend space to be able to really thoroughly dress down an issue. And one of the things that's come out most recently is that we have a group of people who are really interested in the arts and culture. We have, really famous pianists, violinists, conductors, writers, etc., as well as politicians and the private sector. And they came together and thinking, actually, we really need to do something about culture and arts. And so they've just had their first meeting of the Cultural Arts Group last week. And, if you want more details on that, please go to our website without unashamedly kind of promoting ourselves. It's more a case of I can't tell you all the detail, but go to our website and you'll find more information. But what that's trying to do, I suppose, mirror the Bauhaus effect, in that you've got a certain cadre, people coming together to think about what we need to think about when you're actually thinking about culture and arts. And there's something that occurs to us in that conversation. How do we redefine what we mean by culture? I think that's absolutely key. If we don't think about what culture means in Europe and don't start with a different mindset, we're not going to get very far. We have to think about our history in terms of race, gender, identity politics, everything that happens every day on our streets and our cities that actually gives life to what we mean by being European. And that is constantly changing, but there are some elements and essentials around it which aren't about the 1930s or the 1950s or the 80s. It is about people and communities that have moved freely and roam, either illegally or otherwise, across Europe to create this sense of what Europe is. And I think that what we need to be thinking about is, let's drop, and this is quite controversial, I do apologize, is let's drop references to the Renaissance and looking about what happened. Let's think about the fact that we've had the biggest shock in our system. And we've had the biggest cultural shock to our lives, our communities. And one of the things that we're going to be thinking about as communities as we come out of this is that we've been completely occupied by disease. Oh. Hello?
Yes.
Can you still hear me?
Disease, yes.
Disease, death, and desperation. And I think culture and arts can be a huge opportunity for some of those issues to actually come together. And I was really struck by Gerador that, if we were to think so dramatically differently, how do you create let's say, a flash mob across Europe on a regular basis that actually thinks about what it means to create an intersectionality between rich, poor, diverse, etc. But also the other thing is that one of the dynamics that we need to be thinking about, as I mentioned, to the financial climate that we're entering, is that it occurs to me, how much profit do we need in the private sector? How much profit do you really need to survive? And what about creating a cultural premium in the tax system, which is about creating and giving back and making a structure available that really puts culture at the heart of some of these systems and processes to really provide life to the creativity that happens. And I'll leave you on this point. Let's not forget, it was the actions of individuals, a group of individuals, that suddenly came out of their windows and their balconies, not in a premeditated way, but simply wanting to show emotion and symbolize and commemorate something. That led to a global movement. And I think if we don't lose sight of that, and it doesn't actually have to happen in adversity only, that if we were to recreate that sentiment and mood and really think about from now on in, I hope the Bauhaus Initiative will consistently use every social media platform and channel to really think about, how do we make beautiful Europe? And what is beautiful Europe to us? And the beauty within Europe as we move along the next 10 years.
So
That's it from me.
Thank you so much. Montserrat, listen, to make it more understandable and clear to those with us today, what are your next steps regarding the European Bauhaus, and what kind of case studies will somehow be funded or might come out of it, of the process, because it is pretty much abstract so far. I know that the co-design process is just in its early beginnings. So I mean, and it's interesting that you're taking the risk of a bottom-up approach. So you don't know yet, maybe you don't have an answer yet, but what are your expectations? Because one of the concerns is if there's no money in the table, then how will magic happen? Could you give us, please shed some light on this?
Yes, with pleasure. If you allow me to share the slides, it will become clearer even. Okay, so then let's do like that. Okay, yes, here it is. Okay, so then indeed the three core values of the new European Bauhaus are not a novelty as priorities. So these fundamental aspects have been already tackled by a large number of policies and actions. And the scope of the new European Bauhaus is to look for a better integration of all three, and to keep this integration as a constant when defining the places where we would like to live. So then we would like to really capitalize on the existing activities, and I've decided to bring one example from Lisbon. It was not yet declared in our website, but I knew about that, and I think that this is a nice example for you. This is in the context of the participation on the Covenant of Mayors. So the main hazards to be faced due to the climate change were identified. In the context of the, a strategic vision was developed promoting citizens' engagement, collective training, and integrated approach for risk management. And then a plan was carefully developed involving a large number of stakeholders to ensure that it was as complete as possible, addressing a large number of challenges. This plan was also nicely linking, was nicely linking adaptation and mitigation actions, linking apparently different realities because they were framed under different key objectives. Okay. And then the plan proposed a way to move from the European or global main strategy to its local implementation, making it concrete and context-related, becoming tangible for the citizens. What do you think? Do you think that this is a project that has all the ingredients to be considered a new European Bauhaus? I would say yes, because it addresses climate change challenges. It is human-centric and looking for protecting our future. It was a collaborative space for co-development. It is about linking people, institutions, initiative, actions. It is about making tangible the big strategies, and it is about a big transformation. It is certainly sustainable, and I'm quite sure that the urban planners that were involved took good care also of the standards for accessibility. So then regarding your next question about which are the next steps. So in parallel to the co-design phase, the Commission services have been also exploring different options to provide an adequate financial framework. So to this, and this initiative will be based on a combination of instruments that are already available in the different portfolios. So the delivery options explored will secure the concretization of the new European Bauhaus pilots in the short term, but we will also ensure that the movement trigger will contribute to deliver change on the ground in a lasting way. So the delivery will be nourished and complemented by the results of the design process. And then the final version of this package won't be available before the end of this phase. Furthermore, the approval of the proposals made by the Commission has to be approved by the member states following all the pre-established channels. So we can say that we have a plan, but that it is still to be finalized. The first thing that we will do is to launch an European Bauhaus Prize this year. And the call will be out in the forthcoming months, and you will have the opportunity to propose examples as the one I show you as candidates for these prizes. The scope of the prizes is to recognize and celebrate existing achievements, and they will be awarded by the end of summer. On the second half of the 2021, the Commission will launch a number of calls starting to support between 5 and 10 new European Bauhaus that can be considered like lighthouses and demonstrators projects in different EU member states. Focus on different challenges to be addressed through the combination of this triangle of values, so sustainability, inclusion, and the quality of experience. Among the instruments that we are considering, there are the European Regional Development Funds, the Horizon Europe, and the LIFE program, but there are others. As you see, Commission is exploring possible delivery options, capitalizing on synergies between research and cohesion funds, but also on the combination of direct and shared management funds. We were before mentioning the fact that member states are now preparing their programs. Now is the moment also to channel this funding and this way of, through this way of working. So the scope is to relate different financial instruments along common objectives. And hence by now you must be, you must have understood that we won't have one program supporting the European Bauhaus, but several financial instruments that will be combined to work together on the challenges identified during the co-design phase. We will also need to support the community development and to secure the knowledge sharing and the peer learning processes within this community of people working on the new European Bauhaus. And this will allow us to be ready to move into the dissemination phase and go beyond our borders. We know that we will only create a better tomorrow if art, culture, science, technology, innovation, policy, and civil society, I'm sorry if I forgot someone, go hand in hand. I really hope that you all, the participants and the audience of this event, will help us to create these beautiful, sustainable, and inclusive spaces, contributing to this open space through the website of the new European Bauhaus.
Thank you, Montserrat. Listen, Tiago, I mean, as you know, there's the manifesto I mentioned earlier that the Cultural Deal for Europe, called the Cultural Deal for Europe, demanding 2% investment of the recovery fund on cultural enterprises and projects. I mean, there was recently a letter signed by many Portuguese artists to the Prime Minister, sent to the Prime Minister, asking precisely that higher investment on culture and the arts. I mean, I think we all agree that beauty has the power to shape the human heart and that the aesthetics feeds the ethics. But as we listen to the new European Bauhaus and as we going through that letter, I mean, we understand or realize that the artists or the community, part of the community at least, feels that the current programs or speech or funds open to artists and the cultural scene are a bit technocratic and are too much into, you know, decarbonization, into very technocratic outcomes, has opposite, or instead of being open to something like last night a DJ saved my life. The idea of the freedom and beauty on itself, and the idea that aesthetics will feed ethics, regardless of, you know, being specifically matching the decarbonization goals or whatever other biodiversity goals. How do you see these? I mean, do you feel that on one hand, we should have these 2% or whatever percent of funds being invested on the cultural ecosystems, and on the other hand, I mean, you just launched Supersalt. Supersalt will try to match everything, both the environmental goals with the social goals and the aesthetics. But do you feel too tight? Has a too tight roadmap? Would you like to have more open calls, or is it fine this way?
Well, there are a lot of challenges ahead, of course. And one of the main ones is to try to think about culture and education, and in the way, in the way that they go hand in hand. And until now, we are not thinking about that in that kind of way. And that's the way that we really act in Gerador. It's obvious that the effect of education and arts have in this change takes a lot of time, maybe a generation. But don't get me wrong, this needs to be done. We should invest more in environment awareness in schools, and we should do more to put climate challenge in the hands of artists, to promote more cultural initiatives connected with this fight. And there are, I think, some really quick steps that we can take, and you were talking about it. For example, the Ministry of Culture, when they have to choose which cultural activities to sponsor every year, should discriminate the ones that have a very low pollution footprint, or the ones that decide to put this subject in the center of their proposal. So we have to let the environment enter our
methods. Let me just interrupt you to ask something to Montserrat. Would you consider having a stamp, like, for instance, picking up on Tiago was saying, yes, the ministry is choosing which project to fund, and so the carbon footprint could be of course an indicator, a plus, but it could be also a stamp, right? Like the new European Bauhaus stamp. If you match a certain criteria, the new European Bauhaus criteria, then that stamp would give you extra credits or extra points.
Or extra money.
Or extra money, yes.
Or extra money. Well, extra money needs to be reduced from someone else, so the extra money is.
I don't mind. I don't mind.
No, well, the intention is to focus on these activities that are more complete than others. So if we are giving the priority or focusing or trying to concentrate the effort on having something that is tackling the three things in contemporaneous, and not only sustainability, but we disregard the social aspects, or not only aesthetical part without sustainability. It's about the all three, the integration of three.
The European Bauhaus will end up launching a cryptocurrency, you'll see.
This is the digital side of the new European Bauhaus, you see.
But I'm hoping that the Sobressalto, and I can talk about Sobressalto right now, can be one of the lighthouses that Montserrat has mentioned before. So what is Sobressalto? Sobressalto is, I don't know how to say it in English, maybe it's like a bump in the way, or a scary bump in the way, I don't know. If someone knows a better translation, please let me know. I think it will be useful in the future for sure. But Sobressalto, it's a project that intends to connect the creative and cultural sectors with the environment. So Gerador is not an organization focused on the environment. We are a platform of journalism, culture, and education, as I told you before. So the first step that we took was to reach out to an organization that deals with this every day. We made a partnership with Zero, probably the more well-known environmental organization here in Portugal, and started to debate how these two areas, culture and environment, can get together. So we decided to have two approaches. The first is to try to give tools to the cultural and creative communities to make this green transition. We already put forward a guide with best practices for artists and individuals. You can check this for free in our site in gerador.eu. Next week, we will deliver a guide for organizations and cultural spaces like theaters, cinemas, all kind of venues. It's important to underline that we are still learning. We are not perfect, but we chose to share this learning path with everyone, to exemplify that anyone can do the same. It only takes the drive to do it. Internally, we are changing things as well, taking small steps, but with commitment. For instance, our magazine is made of recycled paper now. We eliminated all plastic bottles, cups, and everything in our office and in our space open to the public. And most importantly, everyone that works at Gerador, and we are 24 now, has this mindset, has the will to make this change. So we are developing right now an online tool to help measure the carbon footprint of any cultural activity in partnership with Lisboa Inova. I think Montserrat mentioned Lisboa Inova in her presentation as well, the Agency for Environment and Energy of Lisbon. And we have a roadmap with a lot of ideas and challenges ahead. The second approach reflects about the way that culture can inspire the entire population. Here we are creating a big sensibilization campaign with advertising space on TV, radio, outdoor, with cultural personalities as protagonists, like actors, musicians, artists, people that everyone knows. We are hoping that these familiar faces can help to trigger the changes that we need as a society in a broader way. And right now, we are here in the forum of companies, we are searching for brands that can help us to materialize these two approaches, because this will require some kind of investment. So if anyone is interested, let me know.
Listen, one of the questions I have, thank you so much, Tiago, is Bauhaus in its origins was a school, as you know. So it was something very practical and for architects and designers, etc. I mean, do you feel that there should be some kind of school, even if it's online, of course, a digital one, but some kind of, you know, do-it-yourself approach, but with tutorials attached, or because it seems too much of a bottom-up approach. And maybe mixed with the top-down in the sense that you could have some, you know, like materials and tutorials. And how do you see, please, each one of you, something more similar to the original Bauhaus, with some guidance and inspiring contents and tools? Montserrat, do you want to start?
I can start. So let's see what the community sees as priority. I really do hope that education will come up, because I think that this is crucial. So one Bauhaus project could be even to rethink the way we are teaching at the schools. So rethink all the educational system, and to think also along with the educational system, also the buildings, because this is also conditioning the way we experience the school. And then this will be certainly change in the future, because we will change the new generation. But this is something that at the moment, that the only thing that I can do is influence these 100 people that are around now, and to say, go to the website and tell us. From our side, we are open to any really manifestation of that. This will be great, and I hope that we will have a quite diverse type of challenges, so that we can really concentrate on different strands. So one could be education, another one could be the social housing, the other one could be public spaces, or green areas, or the urban farming, whatever. But this is something that will come from the community. Obviously, the activity.
Dharmendra, I mean, you already have the first 220 faculty members, right? The young leaders. I mean, what kind of toolkits do you see that could arise from this experience, and could help us shape and fasten the process of?
Yeah, this is where I kind of, please no school, please no kind of thinking in the old ways, if I can call it that, without a criticism to anybody. I just think that what we've done with this group of people is to simply, and it's actually, we've moved around Europe. And so each leader has been had the opportunity to say, actually, I'll host. And so everyone from all over Europe, these leaders then go to a different part of Europe. They experience, they breathe, they imbibe that culture whilst they talk about politics and decision-making and influencing. So there's something of a principle of that, is to keep that sense of flexibility and intuition rather than having a toolkit or a classroom, etc. So Montserrat, I love the fact that you're leaving it open. I hope that you do that though, because there'll be political dimensions even operating around you and the whole project to make things, because only 24 months before the elections, new college, so we know where this is going, what the politics might do to influence this. I really believe that what we need to think about genuinely is how do you, as a curator of Bauhaus, ensure there's intersectionality, inter-community and extra-community activity, inter-regionalism, and create the spaces and devices through money, but also there are millions of cultural practitioners across Europe. How do you give them just a little bit of money to say, we want you to get together across intersectionality, inter-community, across Europe, do something which actually is about that simple message. What do we mean by a beautiful Europe, and how do we make and sustain a beautiful Europe? Two simple objectives, but get those practitioners to cross their borders, their streets, in the way that we
could be
did
an Erasmus.
Earlier on.
An Erasmus.
You've taken the words out of my mouth. I didn't want to call it that, but it's like a Bauhaus exchange, which is, it's a Bauhaus exchange to craft a beautiful Europe. But you get cultural practitioners, but also communities with small amounts of money. You know, as a previous funder, I was stunned by in the UK how £500 or £1,000 transformed a local estate. Because actually, what they needed was the extra grit to be able to do something creative on a local estate. And with that, they were able to sustain magic. So you don't think about big money, think about small pots of money. But I think those principles of intersectionality, inter-community, inter-regional, and cross-discipline, as I think are going to be key, but facilitate that easy exchange of artistic practice with community engagement.
It's like in acupuncture, where do you put the needle? In the right place, not a huge sum of a huge envelope of money, but the needle in the right place, right? And all the system changes, the energy flows within the system.
Completely.
Yeah, I think we lost Tiago. We just lost Tiago. He may have ran out of battery. You know, I was thinking of a project that we had here in a poor neighborhood in Lisbon, a very deprived area. And so in that area, the streets didn't have any name, like the song, the U2 song. The streets had no name. And so we just, like 1,000 or 2,000 euros, there was this process of gathering the community, and all together the community deciding which name should have the streets. And then the money was invested on the billboards, and where the names were written down and put laying on the walls, of course. But the process behind it was just a very little sum of money, a little amount, but the process behind was very bonding. Yeah. Yes. Listen, Tiago, it's so sad that we just lost him. But as I said, he's on the ground, so sometimes you face unpredictable events in the ground. Tiago is a doer, so he might come back or not. We never know. Listen, I have one final question. We don't have any questions here. I was just checking the Q&A or the feature. Listen, what would be a success, Montserrat, regarding the next step until the end of the year? The first stage ends in the end of the year, right? The design stage, I believe. There are 3 stages. The next one is design. This one is design, and it ends in the end of the year. What would be success for you?
The co-design will finish by the end of summer. For me, a success will be to have a very large number of inputs, so that we really can see and can understand which are the priorities for the people. Because as you say, this will be a combination of bottom-up and top-down. So the MFF is already there. The priorities are more or less defined, but from which end we can start, this will come from the bottom.
You don't have any kind of incentive, even if it's just a gamification for people to participate, do you?
There are, through the website, there is the possibility to go there, and really it's an open, you don't need to register, it's anonymous if you want, otherwise you can leave your name.
Is there any incentive? Like
Incentive is that you contribute to the European project. I think that this is enough. And then, yes, well, through the calls, yes, we are now negotiating a number of calls, also micro grants for citizens through some of the calls, but this is, everything is under discussion. And by the end of the year, I will say that a big success for me is also to see a large number of applications for the big calls that will start populating the floor after summer. So this will be for me a success already. These calls will also push through this multidisciplinary approach very much. This is on the basis and on citizens' engagement a lot. So this will be key and fundamental to succeed in these calls.
Okay, my last question. I mean, some people say that in some articles in the media, etc., that as we go forward with the European Green Deal, the new European Bauhaus, the next generation EU, the United Nations agenda, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are a bit put aside, and that we should also highlight the importance of the SDGs. How do you see that in the last 2 minutes we have? I mean, do you see that the SDGs are being put a bit aside in terms of the, no? Okay.
No, not at all. I think that we are totally aligned with the requirements of the SDGs. We are implementing the SDGs indeed.
Great. Dharmendra, do you feel that way too?
I think they have been incorporated, but sadly, when I've looked at assessment reports of how member states have adopted and adapted and integrated, we're not really there. And we just need to say that as it is. I think the crisis might generate difference. And I think the evaluation of the member state plans by the European Commission, which is a tall task, should help us think about making sure that how are the SDGs incorporated. But the bigger deal is about climate and energy. Whether we call them SDGs or not, I think it's about making sure we evaluate whether the plans are real, and whether they're going to make the seismic shift that we need to make in the next 36 to 24 months. And so I think that's important. But can I kind of just say, come back to your question that you answered, Montserrat, it was that I'd love that, you know, in the next 6 months in your design phase, because one of the things that I've learned as a big funder when I was in the UK was that how do you enable those in the margins and the places that are left out to participate in the co-design process? And, you know, wouldn't it be great if you were to release through, you have so much access to your existing funding, through ESF monies and all sorts of arts funding that you've got, Creative Europe, you've got basically a pipeline into community across Europe. Wouldn't it be fabulous if you were to create, you know, beautiful Europe ambassadors that are from the margins or the left out or from the intersections of Europe that actually are part of the co-design process? And that, for me, that would be success into September, where you could bring that energy from the ground and actually motivate it, but stimulate it, because taking basically a free market approach to inclusion and engagement isn't going to work. So I would like that you would release that opportunity. And you never know, we have this event every year called State of Europe. We'd love you to come to that and actually display some of this so that we see beautiful European ambassadors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a witness of that. I mean, it's always great. The State of Europe, a great moment. Okay, listen, thank you so much for this inspiring and beautiful moment, if I may say. We truly believe that aesthetics and ethics should go hand by hand, and that, of course, the sustainability agenda and the sustainability shift really requires culture and the arts to give it structure and to give it meaning and to give it vision and a purpose, a higher purpose. Otherwise, it's just, it's like, Jenga, the game Jenga, which is all of those wood pieces that do you know those pieces now, that Jenga?
Tetris.
But yes, otherwise Tetris, yes, somehow Tetris. Otherwise, it's a Tetris without soul. And it's, yes, and culture has that power to give it a soul and a heart, a vibrant one. And either with an agenda or not, if it's just a song or with an agenda attached. Ok, so just to final remarks, eu dizer a quem nos seguiu, agradecer também. Vamos ter, the next conversation will be around capitalism, Shaping Capitalism. WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, just released the report. We just translated it to Portuguese. So we'll have WBCSD on a conversation, involved in a conversation with the Dean of the Católica Lisbon and the Dean of ISEG, Clara and Philippe. And we'll have this conversation around Mariana Mazzucato's ideas, etc., how to reshape capitalism going forward. And then we'll have a conversation on the future of water, sweet and salt water, and then the challenges of sustainable mobility. And last but not the least, to be announced in May, we have this Net Zero Portugal project going on with McKinsey, the consultancy firm, and we will have a conversation as soon as we have the final report in the table about how to become a carbon neutral country. Portugal, we're committed to that by 2050, but now the devil is in the details. What kind of public policies, what kind of materials, what kind of technologies must we have, should we have sector by sector in place in order to achieve that goal? So with no further delay, thank you so much again. Hope to see you again in person, Amendra and Montserrat, soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joy.
Have a lovely background, Amendra. Your paintings are lovely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take